All right, welcome everyone to LRQA's webinar on the changes to the EMS standard that were published in 2015. I'm the Assessment Manager for Southeast Asia and Australasia here at Lloyd's Register. I'm going to walk you through the key changes, what it means for your organisation, some of the context to these changes, and we should take about 10 minutes, I think, to go through this, so stay with us. Okay, so there's going to be three sections. We'll start with the standard for the standards, Annex SL. We'll talk about the new standard 14,001, what's changed in this edition, and what you need to do to prepare for the transition to this new standard. So first of all, we're going to talk about Annex SL. So this is the standard under which all standards are being written. So by 2020, all ISO standards will be significantly different. They'll all have the same structure, identical core text, and use common terms and definitions. These will be guided by what's called Annex SL. So every 5 years, we look at each standard to determine whether it's still relevant, and a technical committee decides whether or not to make changes to the standard. When that's done, a process is undergone, taking a number of years to write the new standard. And since Annex SL was adopted, it's been agreed that all standards will use this high-level structure. This will drive consistency across all standards and allow for them to be more easily integrated when you have multiple certifications. So we align the common elements, text, and structure of the standards, makes the objectives align with organizational objectives, takes the principles from operations and applies them to organizations and their strategy, and it ensures top management engagement. So that's why the Annex SL has been written, to drive some of these key changes to the way standards are used within the organization. So what are the benefits? Well, it helps you use your management system to achieve your business objectives, particularly strategic objectives. Helps you mitigate and address your organizational risks right through the structure of your organization. It has a high emphasis on organizational performance through the use of KPIs. And as I said earlier, it makes it easier to integrate your management systems when they all follow the same structure. So all have a generic 10-clause structure, starting with scope, going through normative references and terms and definitions, introducing context of the organisation, the role of leadership, how you plan and support and deliver the management system expectations. They all require performance evaluation to see how they're going. And of course, the key to any management system is the role of continuous improvement. So across this high-level structure, it roughly follows the familiar plan, do, check, act structure, starting with context and moving through to improvement. So here's a quick overview of the changes to the standards. We've already seen the new Annex SL structure adopted for the business continuity standard and the IT security standard ISO 27001. As well as Asset Management 55001. The big standard obviously is quality, and that new standard was released on the 15th of September 2015, second biggest being EMS, which has the same release date. Next year we'll see food, as well as a brand new standard for occupational health and safety. So now we're going to talk about 14,001 itself, what changed in 2015, what you should be looking out for. So let me preface by saying that the changes are quite extensive. They affect the structure, definitions, the extent and type of documentation required, and there's a lot of detailed requirements, especially those relating to life cycle impacts of products and services. And the big overarching theme is an increased emphasis on the environmental performance of an organisation, with decreased emphasis on a complex documented information control system, to use a phrase used from Annex A in 14,001. In LRQA's view, most clients should benefit from these changes. They'll enable organisations to add value to their organisation by reducing risk and identifying strategic opportunities. So there are some important new and changed terms in 14,001, 2015 that need to be understood before we moved on to the more detailed requirements. Key one, context, the organisation. This is new. Although it doesn't require procedure in a specific form of documented information, the organisation will need to demonstrate that this requirement has been carried out. We'll talk about the detail of that a little bit later. Interested party is a key term. It's altered due to the words perceive itself to be affected by the organisation or its services. So you'll need to consider a wider range of environmental issues, even if the impacts are not scientifically proven. Risks and opportunities is new in 14,001, 2015, identifying risks as well as opportunities associated with the outputs of three key clauses: aspects, compliance obligations, and context. Risks are therefore much broader than environmental aspects. There's a lot more detail on this in section 6.1. Documented information is an altered term. It replaces the word documentation and record. So when the standard uses the phrase retain documented information as evidence of, it means records. And where the standard uses the phrase maintain documented information, it means documentation other than records. We'll talk about that a little later too. Life cycle is a key term. The EMS, the new standard, requires a consideration of all life cycle stages, from raw materials right through to end-of-life treatment. And this is a crucial term for understanding the changes in 14,001. Outsource is another one. This is an external organisation which is outside the scope of the management system, although the function itself is still within the scope. As in 9001, the scope of the system must be extended to cover outsourced functions. Process. So those familiar with QMS 9001 will be familiar with a process approach to management systems. This is quite new for EMS. And last but not least, effectiveness. An increased emphasis on effectiveness is in ISO 14000 2015. And the word is used throughout the standard and 3 times, for example, in clause 5.1 in relation to leadership and commitment. So quite a few changes, and a number of them are quite significant. First is context. So although we don't need a specific procedure, you will need to demonstrate that this process is being carried out. Understanding interested parties is very important. You'll need to identify a process for identifying the needs and expectations of interested parties. Some organisations may already have quite a well-established stakeholder management process, whereas others, this will be quite new. Scope is important. It needs to be credible and apply to the whole organisation and for logical parts of the organisation. LRQA will expect that improvements made in the EMS will result in demonstrable environmental performance improvements, and we'll be able to see that. Next is leadership. This is a new requirement in 14,001, 2015. It's quite similar to the leadership requirements established in 9001 back in 2008. The only new requirement around policy is to include commitments to protection of the environment in the policy relevant to the context of the organisation. In the planning area, there's a new requirement to establish a process to assess risks and opportunity. The scope is beyond aspects to include compliance obligations, context, and interested parties. Organisations must also consider a life cycle perspective and plan to address risks, opportunities, and also to evaluate the effectiveness of these actions. In the support area, there's a greater emphasis on establishing the effectiveness of training, raising awareness, and communicating to the business as well as interested parties about your EMS and your objectives. Operations, as I mentioned earlier, has expanded to include outsourced processes and the life cycle perspective. This will be quite a challenge for a number of organisations. And there's a new requirement in performance evaluation to determine methods for monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation to ensure valid results. And the emphasis again is on the evaluation of environmental performance and the effectiveness of the EMS itself. In the improvement section, there is a more specific requirement to determine if similar non-conformances exist or could potentially occur. This should ensure that every opportunity is taken to learn from lessons of non-conformities, for example, across processes, sites, or even countries if you're working with a large multi-site. Okay, so some quite significant changes. So we thought it'd be worthwhile just running through what you need to do to prepare for the new standard and having that transition from your existing system to a certification. Okay, so have a think about, after we've gone through what we just discussed, what do you think would be the most likely impact of these changes on your organisation? So some clients might see small incremental changes across lots of areas, or there might be some areas that significant work needs to be undertaken. So we're often asked as LRQA, what are the key changes? What do I need to look out for? Well, there's no simple answer because it depends on your organisational structure and the maturity of your current system. The changes required will depend on your current system, your approach, a whole range of circumstances that are specific to your organisation. We recommend a 6-step approach to managing the transition process. We'll run through that very briefly now. Obviously, plan. Have a think about developing a transition plan. Think about your organisation, the people within it, and the current status of your management system. Get yourself a copy of the new standard. Have a look at some of the key changes, what's totally new, what's disappeared, what's changed. Refer to the annexes. The annexes within the standards have a lot of interpretive guidance that's very useful. Upskill, train your team, develop the skills and knowledge. Very important to include top-level management. This may be new to a number of members of top management. You'll need to consider whether your internal auditors are capable of assessing the system as part of the internal program. All of those involved in the development and implementation of the EMS needs to get involved and upskilled. And also consider some of the internal, external parties, particularly your outsourced contractors and those taking control of very key functions within your organisation's life cycle. Okay, so as I mentioned, include top management, internal auditors, management system owners, ensure they're engaged and understand what's changing and what the process will be. You can perform an assessment, either internally by having a look at your readiness for certification, engage your internal auditors to look at that, or you can come to someone like LRQA to do a readiness assessment, to look at a gap analysis to see how far you've got to go. Certification, there's a number of documents that guide you through the process. LRQA have a wealth of this information on our website. Basically, there's a 3-year transition period for ISO 14001. So the drop dead deadline is the 14th of September 2018. It doesn't give any milestones beyond that, or a mandatory adoption of the incoming standard after a certain deadline, but up until 14th of September is the time it takes to transition. That said, I would make a start. There's a lot of work to do. Engage with your certification body to understand whether they're ready to help you through the transition and what they have there available to help you. So, like I said, what are the things that we are being asked? What will we be looking at as auditors? And how can I demonstrate what you need as auditors to assess the compliance with the new standard? Well, our core focus will be on the context of the organisation. This is new for EMS. The involvement of leadership, the extent of planning, and importantly, how you're rating performance. Now, there's a lot of instances where documented information may not be required, but as auditors, it still needs to be clearly demonstrable to us. Now, it might not be on paper, but it could be in Outlook calendars, outcomes of meetings, all sorts of different types of media is now up for potential demonstration of conformance. It doesn't need to be necessarily records and manuals and procedures. Like I said, how you do this is entirely up to you, but we will need to see the documented information in some format. And like I said, all organisations are different. All organisations have different structures and approaches to how they go about running their business. LRQA as a certification body will adapt our assessment approach to understand how your organisation works. So if you're not sure where to start, I'd suggest some training or to do a gap analysis to determine what you might need. If you need help engaging your leadership team, LRQA can provide a bespoke course for them to really get to the quintessential of what they need to understand. And we have in-house and public training courses for internal auditors or anyone else who's involved in the EMS that can be given to them to update their knowledge and skills. That's it from me. Good luck with your transition, and please talk to us if you need any help. Our assessors are there and trained and willing to help you through this important transition process. Thank you.